You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Greeks Gridiron and to more free agency predictions. I am Ethan Haristadoulou, and today we are looking at the New York Football Giants, sitting on just about $39 million in cap space. They have some big pending free agents coming up this offseason, and I'm going to dive into who I think they should potentially re-sign, and or maybe I expect to see them re-sign. And I'm also going to dive into some of the positional needs for this team, give you my reasons as to why I think that. So I invite you all to do the same. Comment down below, Giants fans. Let me hear your thoughts and opinions. But diving in, we'll start with the re-signings. And the first one I want to knock out of here is going to be the big conversation, I think, within the New York Giants and keeping him. And that's going to be running back Saquon Barkley. Spotrac has him projected to earn something along the lines of basically a $10 million AAV. And listen, the conversation around running backs over the last few years and just how much they are worth and what their actual value is for football teams has been a wild one. And I think that there are some guys that are worth those numbers pushing towards that $10 million per year. But I also understand the conversation of these running backs are somewhat a dime a dozen. We see random guys all the time outplaying their counterparts that are making a lot more money than they are. And it seems like you can get guys later in rounds that, just wind up being just as good, if not better than some of those higher round draft picks. It's a weird conversation to have, but I do think that there are some running backs that you just can't quite replace what they actually bring to the table. And I look at guys like Christian McCaffrey, who are rare. Another guy being Derrick Henry, granted second round pick as opposed to first, but still Derrick Henry, a guy that I think was worth every dollar the Tennessee Titans paid. There are those guys that you look at that you go, those guys are difference makers. Those guys are game changers. And I understand injuries have been somewhat of an issue in Saquon Barkley's career, but when he's healthy, he is a game changer for this offense. And on top of that, the situation of the Giants offense being the way it is right now, where you have $40 million per year invested in Daniel Jones, and you have a wide receiver room that is young, talented, but has not quite reached its fullest potential. You have an offensive line that needs so much work on the interior, it's not even funny. There is a lot to look at with this team and go, we could spend money here, and here, and it's probably for very good reason. But when you think about what is great about this offense, I think about Saquon Barkley. If you can get him somewhere along the lines of like $8 million per year for a 2 or 3 year deal because you don't want to dump in a ton of money over a long-term deal, I understand it. You look at, what happened with the Ezekiel Elliott contract, and I think that scared a lot of owners away. Saquon Barkley, when he's healthy, is one of those guys that I look at as a step above. And I'm not a Giants fan, but he's someone that I've always looked at as if he was anywhere else, he would be a massive difference maker for an elite offense. And it's one of those things where he is the offense right now. You're going to tell me Daniel Jones is, you're going to tell me second-year wideout Jalen Hyatt is, or Darius Slayton is. There's potential there. Don't get me wrong. A lot of young, up-and-coming guys in a wide receiver room that I like, but I don't think anyone's quite there yet, and I don't really agree with the situation of dealing Daniel Jones as much money as you did. So I think it should be of importance to keep a guy like Saquon Barkley, who is the best thing going for your offense right now. And quite honestly, depending on how this next season shakes out, could be the best thing you have going for the next 2 or 3 years. And I don't really think that that's something that can be overstated. So my thoughts on that: keep Saquon Barkley around. Yes, you're paying him maybe a little bit more than some other teams would want to, or whatever the situation may be, but Saquon Barkley is a difference-making back when he's healthy, and I think we saw that very clearly this past season. Second guy that I'm going to look at here is going to be linebacker, safety, whatever you want to call him, because it feels like he can line up all over the football field, despite the fact that he's like 6'4", 238 pounds. Isaiah Simmons. Spotrac has some wild estimate of $16.5 million per year for his AAV with whatever deal he signs this offseason. We'll get to that number in a second, but I'll just flat out say I disagree with that number. But again, we'll get into that in a second. 50 tackles this past year, a sack, forced fumble, 3 pass breakups, interception. Simmons presents rare size athleticism combination, and he's almost like of one when you consider just how big he is and just how athletic he is. I don't think he was used well in Arizona, and I think we kind of started to see at least some of what the potential could be with Isaiah Simmons. Give him more time, give him a whole offseason within what the Giants are doing over there on defense, and I think we could see a lot more from him. This is somebody that lined up 137 times on the defensive line, 166 times in the box, 65 times in the slot. He only started a handful of games for them. He wasn't a full-blown starter. He played in every single game this season, but he did not get a start in every single game. It was just a handful of games, and in the limited capacity that we saw, I do think that size, that ability, and that potential that he has when put in the right system could be huge for a defense. I don't think he's going to net $16.5 million per year, though I think that's absolutely insane. I think like a 1 year, $8 million deal, $9 million deal with a decent amount of guarantees, you could definitely lock him up. I think he is in that position where you could present him a prove-it deal with a decent amount of money, and you could lock him up for another season just to see how he ends up turning out. And if he ends up being really good, like, keep him. Again, I look at Isaiah Simmons athletically with his size and the way he is able to move. It's a one-of-one type of scenario. There are not that many guys that are as big as he is that can move the way he is. So if it works out, it's going to work out extremely well. Get him on that 1 year deal, keep him around for another season, see what happens. Worst case scenario, you lose $8 to $9 million, which is a drop in the bucket for the NFL and the way money gets thrown around these days. And then the last guy that I have highlighted here, and this is one that I definitely think needs to have happen here, and that's going to be safety Xavier McKinney. Spotrac has him listed for something along the lines of about $10.5 million per year on his next contract, should he sign one. In 2023, best season of his career. He kind of had the breakout season I expected to see from him a couple of seasons ago. 116 tackles, 11 pass breakups, 3 interceptions, a forced fumble, 2 fumble recoveries. In coverage, the guy works like one of the best of them. Now, you're in a good spot where it took Xavier McKinney quite a bit of time to actually reach the level that I thought his potential had, and it's exciting to see that he finally got there this past season. Being that he's going to turn 25 next season, you have a good opportunity here to sign him on something like a 3-year deal, maybe 4-year deal, and then it gives him an opportunity to potentially re-up even further when he gets to the end of that contract there. So you can kind of play around with the money you have to give him. I do think that like 10 million 0.5 range that Spotrac has is probably about right, given, again, he doesn't have the proven track record of last season being through all 4 years of his career to this point. It was just that 1 year where he really stood up and, announced himself to the league. I think you can kind of use that against him if you're the Giants, but I wouldn't be shocked, again, given the way the cap number just jumped this past week. I do think that maybe you could see him get a few more extra dollars thrown his way, paying him as high as maybe $12 million or so per year. Honestly, wouldn't be a bad choice. That puts him at somewhere along the lines of like 11th to 15th in terms of pay scale with all the other safeties in the NFL, and I don't really see that being an issue. Again, and it's, even if you're on the lower end, again, closer to 10 million than you are 12, you're getting closer to that 15th mark. I would say that Xavier McKinney is definitely a safety worth considering within the top half of the NFL. You might not call him a top 10 guy, but I would certainly be willing to throw him, even without having much debate, within that group of like 16 to 10, within that range there, absolutely. So if you're paying him as the 11th highest paid safety in the league, why not? The guy can line up in the box, over the top, he can be in the slot, he can play at a corner position if he needs to for a specific play. The guy can literally do everything for you, and I think he is one of those homegrown talents that you would want to retain, considering you don't have a truly deep roster of young up-and-coming talent in New York. Now, beyond the re-signing stuff, we'll talk some positional targets here. Where do the Giants need to go, and or where do I expect them to go this upcoming free agency to address this issue? Because the first one that I have on here is one that I'm not going to be surprised if we see it addressed once, maybe even twice in free agency, and then even seeing draft capital go towards it, because the interior of the offensive line was an absolute disaster. This team led the league with 85 sacks this past season, and it wasn't even close. I think the second team was the Washington Commanders with something along the lines of 65. You were literally like 20 sacks ahead of the team behind you. That's absolutely insane. The good thing is, though, this is a pretty solid time to be in the market for an offensive guard or just somebody alongside the interior of the offensive line here. And whether that's through free agency or within the draft, again, not much of a better time to be in that market than now. You look at some of the veteran options that are out there. Laken Tomlinson just got released from the New York Jets. Cody Whitehair a week or two ago from Chicago. Halapulivati Vaitai from Detroit is going to be a guy that could potentially hit the free agent market. Those are guys in that 30-year range where they're older, yes, but a veteran guy to help bring along this offensive line that's full of a bunch of young bucks at this point in time might not be a bad idea. But if you opt to go younger, Ezra Cleveland is an option. You have Robert Hunt from Miami, Damian Lewis from Seattle. Like, there are some younger guys within like their mid-20s that are going to cost a lot and probably are a good long-term answer, but don't be opposed to seeing them go after a veteran. I feel like this offensive line could use a guy like that to help rein in some of the younger guys that you have on this O-line here, and assuming more younger guys that you probably will have coming in as the interior sees some reshuffling. Second position that I'm looking at here is going to be wide receiver, and we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier when I was discussing Saquon Barkley and just the lack of like supreme talent this offense has right now. I do think that focusing on adding competition to the wide receiver room should be something you consider here. When you think of the offense, you don't think of the wide receivers. You don't really think of Darren Waller, even though he did show some flashes last year in this Giants offense. You don't think of Daniel Jones. You think of Saquon Barkley, and if you're not going to keep Saquon Barkley around, we've got to make people think of something else other than just, oh my God, what's this offense going to look like next year? And I do like the idea of adding a wide receiver. And sure, it's easy to cop out and go, yeah, Michael Pittman, T. Higgins, go get one of those guys. That's not really what I'm saying here. You have Jalen Hyatt, who's an exciting up-and-coming talent. You have Wan'Dale Robinson, who, injuries aside, exciting up-and-coming talent. Darius Slayton, who has always been good in spurts here or there, maybe didn't quite hit the ceiling the way I think some people thought he was going to, but at times he does show why he could be a good talent in the league. 4 of the other 5 wide receivers on your roster are set to hit free agency in some capacity or another. I believe Isaiah Hodgins is like a restricted free agent. He is one of those 4. So I do think targeting a guy, but not necessarily the number one guy, because you could look at the draft for something like that, but going after guys that are more so depth, that again, increase the competition, bring the fire to some of these people's heels so they start moving a little bit quicker, maybe working on their craft a little bit more. I'm looking at guys like Gabe Davis from Buffalo, maybe Jawan Jennings from San Francisco. I feel like I heard his name a lot in the playoffs this past year. Darnell Mooney's a guy who, depending on just what his market looks like, could either cost a little bit, maybe too much in my opinion, but if it doesn't work out that way and teams are a little more reluctant to pay him the money he might be looking for, you could probably get him at a reasonable price. DJ Chark is a guy that when he was in Jacksonville, pretty athletic dude, could make some things happen. Again, we're looking at guys here that are going to hold the players' feet already in New York's to the fire and get them moving a little bit more. Noah Brown, KJ Osborne, there's a lot of guys that are going to be in this free agent class that, again, are good quality receivers that can push for snaps and push the wide receiver room you already have maybe into that next level. Bring in some competition. Again, sure, you could say get T. Higgins, get Mike Evans, or whoever it is that winds up being available, but is that going to be the answer? Is it that, or do you want to trust in some of the young guns you have here, bring in some competition to help elevate them to their next levels? That's kind of how I'm looking at it here. Also, I just don't really know the likelihood of the Giants going out and signing a guy like Mike Evans or T. Higgins, who is probably going to be tagged now and traded as opposed to just being outright allowed to test free agency, which means you have to give up capital for that, which I think the Giants need. So then you have a guy like Calvin Ridley. Will the Jaguars be willing, or not the Jaguars, excuse me, the Jaguars, will they allow him to walk after trading capital for him from Atlanta, and Michael Pittman? I don't really think the Colts are going to let him go. So those wide receiver 1 guys that you have potentially available here might not even be available to you. And then lastly, but certainly not least, and this is one that I definitely think needs some work here, especially considering some of the potential free agents you have personally hitting free agency. Adoree Jackson, Darnay Holmes set to hit that free agent market, barring any sort of re-signing between now and when free agency officially begins. This could wind up being a position of need. Now, the way I see it, the Giants took Deonte Banks last year. He's supposed to be your cornerback 1 of the future going forward. So for me, I'm looking more at depth, and I'm looking at guys along the lines of a Miles Bryant from New England, maybe a Dane Jackson from Buffalo, guys that you're going to be able to pay something along the lines of $3 to $5 million, maybe $6 at most, and that's pushing it even then. I think you could get Dane Jackson or Miles Bryant within that $3 to $5 million range that are going to help fill out the depth chart of your cornerback room. I don't think it was the strongest room by any means. within the NFL, and I do think they could use some work there, especially if you wind up losing both Adoree Jackson and Darnay Holmes. You're going to have to fill those holes, and you can't just say, well, just take a flyer on the guys that all, cost $1 million here or $1 million there. Like, no, go get some legitimate talent, guys that have kind of shown that they can play in spots. It doesn't have to be cornerback one. Again, you're kind of looking at Deonte Banks as that guy. So let's get some guys to fill out the room that have shown some talent, that have shown the ability to play, or maybe forced into situations where they had to start, even though they necessarily shouldn't have been a starter, but did look pretty solid in that event. So that's kind of what I'm looking at as far as a cornerback signing would go. Doesn't have to be a money breaker, but a guy that's going to, come in that can show up when you need him to. But that's kind of what I'm thinking and or expecting from the New York Giants. Giants fans, I invite you all to do the same. Let me know in the comment section down below. But that is it for me. As always, greatly appreciate if you're hanging around till the very end of the video. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.